The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years. 12 species had come together under the banner of the Galactic Concord, sharing resources, knowledge, and the vast emptiness of space. They built great cities on distant worlds. They created wonders that their ancestors could never have imagined. And in their libraries and temples, they kept stories of the old times, tales passed down through generations until no one could say what was true and what was myth. Among these stories were whispers of a species called the Terrans. They came from a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy, a world so unremarkable that most star charts did not even bother to name it. But the Terrans themselves were anything but unremarkable. The old texts described them as strange creatures, soft-skinned and fragile, yet possessed of a stubbornness that bordered on madness. They did not know when to surrender. They did not understand the concept of acceptable losses. When pushed, they pushed back harder, and they never, ever stopped. The stories said that the Terrans had walked among the stars long ago. They had traded with the ancestors of the conquered species. They had fought beside them in wars now forgotten. And then, without warning, they had vanished. Their ships stopped appearing in ports. Their colonies went dark. They fell silent. Some believed they had destroyed themselves, as young species sometimes did. Others thought they had found something beyond the galaxy's edge and simply left. But a very few, believed that the Terrans were still out there somewhere, waiting in the darkness for reasons known only to them. Did not believe any of it. She was young by standards, barely 200 years old, and she had spent most of her life studying the history of the conquered. She knew how stories grew and changed over time. She knew how desperate people invented heroes to comfort themselves. And she knew that the Terrans, if they had ever existed at all, were nothing more than a convenient legend. She said as much during a debate at the Grand Academy on her. Her opponent was an elder historian with silver scales and eyes that had seen centuries pass. He listened to her arguments with patience, and when she finished, he simply smiled. "You are clever," he said, "but cleverness is not wisdom. I have spent my life studying the old texts, and I tell you that the Terrans were real. Their disappearance was not an accident or a tragedy. It was a choice. They saw something coming, something we cannot yet understand, and they chose to wait. One day they will return, and when they do, the galaxy will remember why it once feared and loved them in equal measure." Laughed at his words. The audience laughed with her, simply nodded and said nothing more. That debate had taken place 5 years ago, had gone on to become a respected scholar in her own right, and she had not thought about Terrans or old legends in a very long time. She had more pressing concerns now. Everyone did. They had come. No one knew where the Dominion had originated. They appeared from beyond the charted regions of space, a fleet of black ships that moved with terrible precision. They were not entirely organic, not entirely machine. They were something in between, a hybrid of flesh and metal that should not have been possible, and they had come to conquer. The first world to fall was a small colony on the Concord's outer edge. The fleet arrived without warning, and within 6 hours every living being on the planet was dead. The Concord sent a response fleet. They destroyed it. They sent a larger fleet. They destroyed that one too. World after world fell. They did not negotiate. They did not accept surrender. They simply arrived, killed everything that moved, and stripped the planet of resources before moving on. The Conquered, which had known nothing but peace for 3,000 years, found itself facing extinction. On the fortress world of Prime, Commander Cole stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the tactical display with hollow eyes. She was a veteran of border conflicts and pirate raids, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. The Armada was approaching, over 1,000 ships strong. The Conquered had managed to gather barely 300 to defend the planet. Her tactical officer, a nervous young male with trembling hands, reported the latest projections. At current force ratios, the Conquered fleet would be destroyed within 4 hours. The planetary shields would fail 2 hours after that. Total conquest would be complete before nightfall. Cole had always believed in duty. She had always believed that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle, but standing there, watching doom approach, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt despair. "All ships," she said quietly, "prepare for combat. We will make them pay for every inch of ground. We will show them that the conquered does not surrender, and if we must die, we will die with honor." Her words were brave, her voice did not waver, but in her heart she knew the truth. This was the end. The conquered would fall, and there was no one left to save them. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she remembered the old stories her grandmother used to tell. Stories of strange creatures from a distant world who fought with the fury of cornered animals. Stories of the Terrans, who never knew when to quit. She pushed the thought aside. Those were just legends, fairy tales for children. The Terrans were gone, if they had ever existed at all. And yet at that very moment, something stirred in the darkness between stars. Something old, something patient, something that had been watching and waiting for a very long time. The galaxy had forgotten the humans, but the humans had not forgotten the galaxy, and they had seen enough. Deep in uncharted space, engines that had been cold for centuries began to warm. Lights flickered on in corridors that had known only silence, and 12,000 men and women woke from their long sleep, their eyes opening to screens filled with images of burning worlds and dying innocents. They had sworn an oath long ago to protect those who could not protect themselves. They had hidden when they were weak, but they were not weak anymore. The legends were about to walk again. The first warning came from a sensor station on the edge of the system. A young technician noticed an unusual reading on her display, a massive object emerging from a region of space that all charts marked as empty. She ran the scan 3 times, certain that her equipment was broken, but the reading remained the same. Something was coming, something enormous. Commander Cole received the report on her bridge, and for a moment she felt her heart sink even further. More, she thought. They were sending reinforcements to ensure total victory, as if their 1,000 ships were not enough. But as the object drew closer, the sensors began to paint a different picture. The ship, if it could even be called a ship, was unlike anything in the Conquered's databases. It was massive, nearly 5 kilometers long, built of dark metal and strange angles. Its hull was covered in symbols that no translation program could read, and it was not broadcasting any known signals. "Unknown vessel," said into her communicator, "identify yourself immediately. You are entering a combat zone." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then her communications officer turned to her with wide eyes. "Commander," he said, "we are receiving a transmission, audio and visual. The language is. It is an old Conquered dialect, very old, but the speaker is not Conquered." "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and Cole saw something she had never expected to see. A face appeared on the display. It was a Terran face, a human face, a male with dark hair and tired eyes, wearing a uniform of unfamiliar design. He looked directly into the camera, directly at her, and he spoke in a voice that was calm and steady. "This is Captain Jake Mercer of the vessel Endurance. We have been monitoring your situation for some time. We know you are outmatched. We know you expect to die today, but we are here now and we would like to offer our assistance." Could not speak. Around her the bridge crew stood frozen in shock. The legends, the myths, the stories that everyone had dismissed as fantasy, they were real, the Terrans were real, and they were here. "You have been gone for 3,000 years, she finally managed to say. "Where have you been? Why did you leave? Why are you returning now?" Jake Mercer smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Those are long stories, Commander, and I promise I will tell you everything when there is time. But right now, there is a fleet of murderers approaching this world, and I believe you could use some help. Will you accept it?" Cole had spent her entire career making difficult decisions, but this one was easy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, we accept." Aboard the Endurance, Jake Mercer closed the transmission and turned to his first officer. Lieutenant stood beside him, a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen more battles than she cared to remember. She had been with Jake since the beginning, since the dark days when humanity had nearly ceased to exist. "They accepted," Jake said. "Signal the fleet, all ships to battle stations." Nodded and began issuing orders. Around them, the great ship came alive. Corridors that had been silent for years filled with the sound of running feet. Weapons systems that had been dormant for centuries powered up with a low hum. 12,000 humans, the crew of the Endurance and its escort vessels, prepared for war. Jake walked to the main observation window and looked out at the stars. So many years, he thought. So much time spent hiding and rebuilding, but they had always known this day would come. 2,000 years ago, a plague had swept through human space. It was a designed sickness, created by an enemy that humanity had never identified. Within a decade, 90% of the human population was dead. The survivors fled to a hidden colony beyond the galaxy's edge, a world they called Haven. There, they sealed themselves away from the universe and focused on one thing: survival. And they had survived. More than that, they had thrived. Cut off from the galaxy, they had pushed the boundaries of science and technology. They had enhanced their bodies, sharpened their minds, and built weapons that their ancestors could never have imagined. They had become something new, something stronger. But they had never forgotten who they were. They had never forgotten the values that had defined humanity since the beginning: courage, compassion, the refusal to abandon those in need. For decades, hidden scouts had monitored the galaxy. They had watched the conquered grow complacent. They had watched them begin their campaign of conquest, and they had debated endlessly whether to intervene. The debate ended when the scouts transmitted footage from a world called Seven. They had landed there 3 days earlier. When they left, not a single living thing remained. Men, women, children, all dead, all slaughtered without mercy or purpose. Jake had watched that footage in silence. Then he had called for a vote. The result was unanimous. Humanity was going back to the galaxy, and they were going to learn what it meant to make an enemy of the human race. Now, as the Endurance moved into position beside the conquered fleet, Jake felt a strange sense of peace. This was what they had been waiting for. This was why they had endured. "Captain said, the Armada is entering weapons range. They are hailing us." "Put it through." The screen showed a commander, a twisted fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components. Its voice was cold and empty, like metal scraping against metal. "Unknown vessel, you have entered Dominion space. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. This is your only warning." Jake looked at the creature on the screen. He thought about Seven. He thought about all the worlds that had burned. He thought about the millions of innocents who had died screaming while the galaxy did nothing. Then he smiled. "My name is Jake Mercer," he said. "I represent the human race, and we do not surrender, we do not run, we do not forgive those who murder the innocent. You wanted a war, congratulations, you just found one." He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. "All batteries," he said calmly, "open fire." The Endurance shuddered as its weapons unleashed hell upon the fleet. And across the galaxy, in every corner of conquered space, the message spread like wildfire. The legends had returned, the humans had come back. And they were very, very angry, had never believed in the old stories. She had built her entire career on the idea that the Terrans were nothing more than myths invented by desperate people. And now she stood on the bridge of a human ship, surrounded by creatures that should not exist, watching them prepare for a battle that should not be possible. The Conquered had sent her as a cultural liaison, a fancy title that really meant they wanted someone to figure out who these humans were and what they wanted. She had volunteered for the mission, partly out of curiosity and partly out of shame. She had spent years mocking those who believed in the Terran legends. Now she needed to see the truth with her own eyes. What she saw amazed her. The Endurance was unlike any vessel she had ever encountered. Its corridors were wide and clean, filled with soft light and the quiet hum of powerful engines. The technology was beyond anything the Conquered possessed. She watched as crew members interacted with systems that responded to thought as much as touch. She saw medical bays where wounds healed in minutes instead of days. She observed weapons being loaded that her scientific training told her should not work according to known physics. But what struck her most was not the technology, it was the humans themselves. She had expected warriors, cold and serious, preparing for death with grim determination. Instead, she found people laughing and joking with each other as they worked. In one corridor, she passed a group of soldiers sharing food and telling stories. In another, she heard music playing from a small device while engineers calibrated a weapons system. They acted as though the coming battle was just another day, just another problem to be solved. Her guide was a young woman named Vance, a medic who had been assigned to answer questions. Was small by human standards, with kind eyes and quick hands that moved constantly as she spoke. "You seem confused," said as they walked through the ship. "I am," admitted. "In a few hours many of you will die, yet you act as though nothing is wrong. Do humans not fear death?" Thought about the question for a moment. "We fear it," she said. "But we learned a long time ago that fear does not help. It does not make you stronger. It does not make you faster. It just makes you freeze when you need to move. So we acknowledge the fear and then we set it aside and do what needs to be done." "But why?" asked. "Why fight at all? This is not your war. These are not your people. You could have stayed hidden forever." Stopped walking and turned to face her. "We saw what they did to 7, she said quietly. "We saw children lying dead in the streets. We saw families torn apart. And we asked ourselves a simple question, if not us, then who? If not now, then when?" She shrugged. "Someone has to stand up. Someone has to say enough. Today, that someone is us." Later, was introduced to a squad of ground soldiers who would be deploying to the planet's surface. Their leader was a sergeant named Ben, a large man with hands and an easy smile. His team consisted of 8 soldiers, men and women of various ages, all of them checking their equipment with practiced efficiency. "So you are the famous humans," said, "the legends made flesh." Ben laughed. "We are just people," he said. "We eat, we sleep, we complain about the food. The only difference between us and anyone else is that we are too stubborn to know when to quit." "They have conquered 100 worlds," said. "They have never been defeated. What makes you think you can stop them?" Ben exchanged glances with his squad, and they all smiled. "They have never fought humans before," he said simply. "They do not know what they are dealing with. They see soft bodies and short. They think we are weak because we do not have natural armor or claws or venom. But they do not understand. Our weakness is our strength. We learned to fight because we had to. We learned to adapt because we would have died otherwise. And we learned something else too." "What is that?" "We learned that the universe does not care about fair. It does not care about odds or numbers or logic. The universe only cares about who refuses to give up. And nobody refuses to give up like humans do." The battle began an hour later. The fleet advanced in perfect formation, confident in their superior numbers. Exarch 07, the commander of the Armada, watched from his flagship as his ships closed the distance. He had studied the unknown vessel that had appeared. His analysts had found fragments of old data, records from 3,000 years ago describing a species called Terrans. But those records showed primitive technology and limited capabilities. This new ship was an unknown factor, but it was still just one ship against 1,000. The mathematics were clear, they would win. But mathematics had never met humans before. The Endurance moved with a speed that should have been impossible for a ship its size. It did not charge straight into the enemy formation. Instead, it curved and twisted, drawing groups of ships out of position, creating gaps in their lines. When they pursued, They found themselves caught in crossfire from weapons that seemed to appear from nowhere. Captain Jake Mercer stood at the center of his bridge, issuing orders with calm precision. He had studied the tactics, he understood their patterns, and he knew exactly how to break them. "Carrier Group 7 is moving to flank," reported. "Let them," Jake said, "pull our destroyers back. Let them think they have the advantage. Then hit them with the main battery when they enter the kill zone." They fell into the trap. 200 ships reduced to debris in a matter of minutes. On the planet below, Ben's squad touched down in the capital city, where conquered forces were fighting a desperate defense against ground troops. The aliens watched as the humans moved through the streets, their movements fast and coordinated, their weapons firing with deadly accuracy. They had never seen anything like it. And they were beginning to understand that the old legends were not exaggerations. The humans had returned, and they had come to win. The battle for Prime would be remembered for 1,000 years. Songs would be written about it. Monuments would be built. Children across the galaxy would grow up hearing stories of the day the legends walked among the living. But for those who were there was no glory in it. There was only fire and blood and the desperate struggle to survive. In space, the Armada threw everything it had at the human fleet. Exarch 07 had realized his mistake too late. The Terrans were not the primitive species described in the old records. They had evolved. They had advanced. And they fought with a ferocity that his tactical programs could not predict. The Endurance twisted through the enemy formation like a predator among prey. Its hull was covered in adaptive armor that shifted and changed to deflect incoming fire. Its weapons systems fired in patterns that seemed random, but were actually calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum energy expenditure. And its crew operated with a synchronization that bordered on telepathic. Captain Jake Mercer stood at the center of the chaos, his eyes moving constantly across tactical displays, his mind processing information faster than any computer could match. Human neural enhancement technology had given him the ability to see patterns in the battle that others could not. He knew where the enemy would strike before they moved. He knew which ships were vulnerable and which were decoys. And he used that knowledge without mercy. "Enemy carrier breaking formation on the port side," reported. "Let it go. Focus fire on the command cluster. Take out their coordination and the rest will fall apart." Human destroyers surged forward, their weapons blazing. 3 command ships exploded in rapid succession, and suddenly the enemy fleet began to lose cohesion. Ships that had moved in perfect formation now hesitated, unsure of their orders. And in that hesitation they died. But they were not finished. They still had numbers and they were willing to spend those numbers freely. Wave after wave of ships threw themselves at the Endurance, trying to overwhelm it through sheer attrition. Human pilots, led by Lieutenant Commander Dawson, flew their fighters into the swarm, dancing through enemy fire with reflexes that seemed superhuman. Had been flying since he was 16 years old. He had spent 10,000 hours in simulators and another 5,000 in actual combat. His hands moved over the controls without conscious thought. His body and machine merged into a single entity. He destroyed 14 enemy craft in the first hour of battle. By the second hour, he had stopped counting. "They just keep coming," his wingman said over the radio. "Then we just keep killing them," replied. "Simple math." On the surface of Prime, the situation was even more desperate. They had landed ground forces in massive numbers, and they were pushing toward the capital city from all directions. Conquered soldiers fought bravely, but they were outmatched. Their weapons did damage, but not enough. Their armor provided protection, but not enough. They were dying by the thousands. And then the humans arrived. Ben's squad hit the ground running, literally. They moved faster than the conquered soldiers had ever seen organic beings move. Their weapons fired projectiles that punched through armor like paper. Their tactics were fluid and unpredictable, shifting from offense to defense and back again with seamless efficiency. But what truly amazed the conquered forces was the way the humans fought together. They communicated in short bursts of words and hand signals, anticipating each other's movements without seeming to think. When one soldier reloaded, another covered them automatically. When one was wounded, another dragged them to safety without hesitation. They fought as a single organism, each part supporting the others. They pushed hard against the city's eastern wall, sending thousands of soldiers into the breach. Ben saw the line about to collapse. He saw conquered soldiers falling back in panic, and he made a decision. "Cover me," he told his squad. Then he charged. He ran directly into the enemy advance, his weapon firing on full automatic. Soldiers fell around him like wheat before a scythe. He kept moving, kept firing, kept killing. When his weapon ran empty, he drew his sidearm. When that ran empty, he used his knife. When the knife broke, he used his fists. The conquered soldiers watched in disbelief as a single human held the breach alone. One of them later described it as watching a force of nature. Ben was shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in the leg. He did not stop. He could not stop. Behind him were innocent people who would die if he failed, and Ben had never failed anyone in his life. Reinforcements arrived 3 minutes later. To Ben, it felt like 3 hours. He collapsed against a broken wall, bleeding from a dozen wounds, surrounded by the bodies of enemies he had killed with his bare hands. "You are insane," a conquered medic said as she rushed to treat him. Ben laughed, then coughed blood. Probably, he admitted, but the line held. In the skis above, Exarch 07 finally understood the truth. His analysts had been wrong. The old records had been wrong. Everything the Dominion believed about the Terrans was wrong. They were not soft. They were not weak. They were the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever produced, and he had made the terrible mistake of threatening those they had chosen to protect. "All ships," he commanded, his voice carrying a note of something his kind rarely experienced. "Fear. Focus all fire on the Terran vessel. Destroy it at any cost." 300 ships turned their weapons on the Endurance. The human vessel shuddered under the assault. Armor plates that had deflected smaller attacks began to buckle. Warning lights flashed across the bridge. Jake Mercer gripped the railing and watched his ship take damage it was never designed to survive. He thought about the people depending on him. He thought about the promise he had made. Then he smiled. He said calmly, "Signal the reserve fleet. Tell them to." His eyes widened. "Sir, if we reveal them now." "Now is exactly the right time. Do it." Across the battlefield, space itself seemed to shimmer. And from nothing, 30 more human warships appeared, their weapons already charging. They had thought they were fighting one ship. They had been fighting a trap. And the trap had just closed. The armada broke like glass against stone. One moment they were a coordinated fleet of conquerors, confident in their superiority. The next, they were a scattered collection of burning ships, fleeing in every direction as human weapons tore them apart. Exarch 07 watched from his flagship as his empire's greatest fleet disintegrated around him. His tactical systems showed red indicators spreading across the display like a disease. 300 ships lost in the first wave, another 200 in the second. His escorts were gone. His support craft were gone. He was alone, surrounded by enemies, and for the first time in his long existence, he understood what it meant to be prey. "Signal the retreat," he commanded. "All surviving vessels disengage and fall back to Dominion space." But the humans were not finished. Captain Jake Mercer watched the enemy flagship on his tactical display. He knew what that ship represented. He knew the atrocities that had been ordered from its bridge. 40 other worlds, millions of innocent lives extinguished without mercy. "That ship does not leave this system," he said quietly. "Launch boarding parties." The assault was swift and brutal. Human Marines breached the flagship from 6 different points, fighting their way through corridors designed to confuse and kill intruders. They moved in perfect coordination, clearing each section with methodical efficiency. The defenders fought hard, but they had never faced enemies like this. Enemies who did not hesitate. Enemies who did not retreat. Enemies who kept coming no matter how many fell. Exarch 07 died in his command chamber, surrounded by the bodies of his guards. The Marine who killed him was a young woman named Lisa Park. She was 23 years old. She had lost her parents to the plague 2,000 years ago. She had grown up on Haven, training for a war she hoped would never come. Now she stood over the body of the being who had ordered the deaths of millions, and she felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Target eliminated," she reported. "Command ship secured." In space, the remaining vessels fled into the darkness. Less than 100 ships escaped from an armada of 1,000. They carried with them stories of what they had seen, stories of humans who fought like demons, stories of weapons that understanding, stories of a species that had returned from the grave to exact terrible vengeance. The Dominion would think twice before threatening the galaxy again. On Prime, the sun rose over a city that should have been destroyed. Smoke still drifted from burning buildings. The streets were littered with debris and the bodies of the fallen, but the people were alive. The children were safe. The nightmare was over. The Conquered held a ceremony 3 days later in the Great Plaza at the heart of the capital. Representatives from all 12 member species gathered to honor those who had fought and died. But mostly, they came to see the humans. The old historian spoke first. His voice was weak with age, but his words carried across the silent crowd. "I spent my life believing in legends," he said. "I told anyone who would listen that the Terrans were real, that they would return someday. Most people thought I was a fool. Perhaps I was, but I was also right." He paused and looked at the humans standing nearby. "You came back for us, you fought for us, you died for us, and we do not even know why." Captain Jake Mercer stepped forward. He looked tired. His uniform was scorched in places, and there were bandages visible beneath his collar. He had not slept in 4 days, but his eyes were clear and his voice was steady. "We came back because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. 3,000 years ago, we left this galaxy to save ourselves. We were dying and we had no choice, but we never forgot you. We never stopped watching. And when we saw what they were doing, we knew we could not stay hidden any longer." He looked out at the crowd, at the thousands of faces staring at him with hope and wonder and gratitude. "Humanity does not seek to rule. We do not want to control. We are not here to build an empire. We are here because we believe that innocent people deserve protection. We are here because we believe that monsters should be stopped. We are here because someone needed to stand up, and we decided that someone would be us." He paused. "We offer the Conquered our friendship, our technology, our strength, not as masters but as partners, not as saviors but as equals. The galaxy is vast and it is full of dangers. We believe we are stronger together than we are apart. If you will have us, we would like to walk beside you into whatever future awaits." The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then Commander Cole stepped forward. She had fought beside the humans. She had watched them bleed and die for strangers. She knew what kind of people they were. "We will have you," she said, "gladly." The crowd erupted in cheers. Species that had never agreed on anything joined their voices in celebration. For the first time in months, there was joy instead of fear, hope instead of despair. Later that evening, found Ben sitting alone on a broken wall, looking up at the stars. His arm was in a sling and his face was pale from blood loss, but he was smiling. "You were right," she said, sitting beside him. "I spent years mocking the legend of the Terrans. I said you were myths, fairy tales. I was wrong." Ben reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flask. "We were legends once, I suppose, but legends are just stories people tell about those who refused to give up when everyone else did." He offered her the flask. "Try this. It is called whiskey. Humans have been drinking it for thousands of years." Took a small sip and coughed. "It burns." "Yes," Ben agreed, "but you get used to it." They sat together in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, they were licking their wounds and planning their revenge. Somewhere out there, new threats were gathering in the darkness. The galaxy was still dangerous. The future was still uncertain. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, the legends had returned. Tonight, humanity had come home. And tomorrow, together, they would face whatever came next.